Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Good evening and welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Today we'll be doing a retrospective on the life and work of Terence McKenna. Joining us are Seriah Azcaf.
Hi.
Michael M. Hughes.
Hello.
And the perennially articulate Red Pill Junkie. Thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us. And me, Joshua Cutchin, who loves doing Terence McKenna impressions.
I think that was a request that you introduce it like that.
Yeah, well, that's I didn't realize that I had a good impression until I did it on Radio Mysterioso, and now on Twitter I keep on getting people saying, "Do your Terence McKenna impression." So I'm sure it'll crop up again tonight because this is I've been sort of jonesing to do a Terence McKenna episode for a while because for me personally it's not been it's more than any cryptozoologist or ufologist or even almost more than any other Fortean. Terence McKenna has been somebody who's really kicked me in the tail and got me to think more than anybody else. I make it a duty of mine once a year to sort of just work my way through all the lectures of his that I can find, which I haven't done this year yet. I'm running out of time. I need to do it. But he's been a huge influence on the way that I think, and I think that everybody should, give him a listen. So let's dive in, guys.
So this, as Josh said, this was his idea. But I am not overly familiar with Terence McKenna because McKenna was always the psychedelic guy, and through most of my life, I kind of stayed away from the psychedelic side of things. It wasn't until I read DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and Supernatural from Graham Hancock that I started considering this stuff. But I've never pursued looking into Terence McKenna. I've listened to his brother on a number of interviews and found it really interesting. But this is going to be more you guys, because I don't know a lot about him outside of his Time Wave Zero stuff, which I always thought was kind of interesting. But as far as the psychedelic stuff and his ideas, this is more on you guys.
We can handle that.
I think that Mike might actually be a bigger acolyte than I am.
Well, why don't we start with who he is for anyone who doesn't know?
Well, he was an ethnobotanist, or no, sorry. I guess sort of Dennis is more of the ethnobotanist character. It's interesting. But he was a lecturer and author, and was very involved in the psychedelic community. It's sort of interesting. His brother Dennis McKenna is sort of a botanical pharmacist. That's the route that he's taken. He's gone a very sort of scientific route. And Terence was always very much into like the sort of philosophical, cultural underpinnings of what the psychedelic experience can reveal to people, and just sort of taking a look at, paradigmatic ideas of reality and culture. Mike, read anything else you want to add to that or amend that I got incorrect?
Yeah, well, Terence, a word frequently used for Terence is a bard, and he very much was a bard. He had the true Irish gift of gab, in a way that very few people do. He could talk extemporaneously and just throw off aphorism after aphorism and have people falling on the floor, clutching their stomachs, laughing, and at the same time be saying really profound things about reality. A brilliant, I think it was mostly an autodidact, unlike Dennis, his brother, who went the traditional sort of scholarly route. And Terence sort of came out of the psychedelic closet and became a celebrity in the early 80s, I think through talks he gave at Esalen, and really just blew up on the scene. The first place I remember encountering him was in Omni magazine. They had a big thing on him, and I think the picture of him was in a hot tub at Esalen, and where he held court, and anyone who ever listens to him, he's just a spellbinding speaker. And like I said, just totally off the cuff, brilliant stuff would just roll out of him in a way that very few people can hope to do. Certainly not me.
Yeah,
but
I get the impression whenever I listen to his lectures that I think he prepared more of it than he actually did. That's one of those sort of guys.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I mean, I know people who knew him personally. Unfortunately, I never got to meet him, but they would go to Palenque every year in Mexico, which is gorgeous ruins. I was there, but I wasn't there when Terence was there. Psychedelic psychedelic conferences where he would sort of hold court, and for someone who smoked as much marijuana as he did, to just have that lucidity when he was speaking is fascinating. I mean, he was a pure entertainer, and he was an entertainer that dealt with really deep and profound and challenging philosophical concepts that relating to psychedelics, but also relating to lots of other ontological sort of issues and questions too.
Yeah, I should have let you lead because that was so much more eloquent than I could.
Oh no, man,
that was excellent. That was very, very, very well done. Yeah.
Well, I aim to be like Terence. I haven't done nearly as many mushrooms, but we can always work on that.
Anything to add, Red Pill?
Okay, so before I get to how I started to get interested into McKenna, his corpus, his wide corpus, I think it's important to know we've already mentioned his younger brother Dennis, how Dennis did become a scientist, unlike Terence, who I guess in a way was very much anti-science. He was very pointing out the limits of science in trying to define or determine or interpret experiences and knowledge that challenge the scientific method and our empirical materialistic paradigm.
Yeah, one of his quotes was that he always said he hated science but loved reason. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that the reason that this happened is because both brothers, and this is where the legend of McKenna started, both brothers went to this famous trip to a really remote place in Colombia called La Chorrera. It was to this really remote jungle in which they were, I think their aim was to try to find an indigenous form of DMT. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys.
Yeah, they were on a search for ayahuasca.
Exactly.
Essentially, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they didn't find it, but very serendipitously, when they arrived to this remote, village in which they were basically the only two white men, they were not alone. Actually, they were with a few more people. There were this group of hippies who were there, and on this quest, this psychedelic quest, and when they arrived, because of the rains had been so potent, the whole place was covered with magic mushrooms. So these guys started to eat magic mushroom almost nonstop through the remainder of the stay there, and that's when they conducted this really interesting and really difficult to understand experiment in La Chorrera. I think that Dennis was the one who came up with it. They were basically trying to create a psychedelic UFO, if you can understand that. They were trying to alter the DNA of a human being and try to embed the psychedelic compounds into their DNA, and that will come up like create this object at the end of time that will be like almost like a spaceship that will almost let them, go and travel into hyperspace. And it's very interesting to read about. There are two books in which you can read that account. One was True Hallucinations, that was written by Terence, and the other one, in which you can read from Dennis's point of view, is more recent one, is The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. So obviously that didn't happen. Obviously they didn't turn Dennis into a flying saucer. Actually, it seems that if you read it from the objective point of view, it seems like Dennis kind of like went into a mental breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
He slowly, get back into his senses. And interestingly enough, the one who never actually managed to get back into quote unquote normal was his brother Terence. After what they experienced, he kind of rejected the scientific method. And if he was going to become a scientist, he decided to, go and quit school and quit college and go on his way and have many adventures. And those adventures actually, forced him into self-exile, because he became almost like an outlaw. He wasn't allowed to return to the United States. Actually, he was pursued by the.
Yeah, he was dealing hashish. He was bringing hashish back from East Asia or sending it back. Can't remember the details. And so he was on the lam for a while. That's the thing I remember about True Hallucinations is he said that his brother Dennis became sort of a carrier wave, and his brother would just make this sound. And that's, and he was fixated on making this sound, this noise that he would make with his mouth, So
it was like a buzz, or like the sound that you would get from far away distant wind chimes, something
right,
like that. Right,
yes. And then Terence did indeed see a UFO.
Exactly,
said, yeah. The clay said it was like a cloud was moving along, and then it sort of pulled apart into two, and then it fused back again. And then it transformed into a UFO, and he wanted to run and tell someone about it, but he was too amazed by what he was seeing. And then he said it turned into like a almost cheesy George Adamski style.
Exactly.
Like something like whatever the Adamski UFO was made out of, like a piece of machinery or something. And he was just kind of stunned that this UFO looked so tacky, and so the clearly fake UFO photos that he had seen, but at the same time he's seeing it, and that's the other aspect. He's very well known, and he should be well known for his advocacy of the psychedelic experience, particularly tryptamines, psilocybin, and DMT, but he also talked a lot about UFOs. And of course that goes back to that profound experience that he had at La Chorrera. And I can't roll my R's like a native speaker, so Red Pill, you'll have to do that better.
That's why I'm here.
I remember him calling his La Chorrera experiences. Did I do it right? As either being like tight magic or loose science. And and I remember him saying that he saw that the Dansky craft, and he said it looked fake as hell, but supposedly knew what he was seeing. But yeah, if anybody if anybody who needs sort of a gateway into all this, into his work, who's aware of the Road Go fan, there's no shortage of him talking about stuff on talking about UFOs on YouTube. And he really had some thoughts that were just pretty ground shaking. I remember at one point he mentioned that concern for the materiality of the saucer is an anachronistic belief, and this was at like a conference back in the late '90s, maybe. Maybe I can't remember his death date, but like it's amazing to me how sort of ahead of the curve he really was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he really was. He synthesized a lot of things. He synthesized Jung's idea of the UFO as like a psychic object of some sort, but yet a psychic object with real material effects. And the Jacques Vallée idea that the UFO is bigger than a machine, that it's some sort of social control system. And the other aspect that he really pulled into it was he used to tell ufologists, he said, if I told you guys there's a 20% chance if you fly to New Zealand right now, you will see a UFO. Most of you would drop everything, get on a plane, and go to New Zealand to see this UFO. He said, but if I can show you aliens right now, and I can show you in 20 minutes, I'm just going to give you 3 to 5 grams of dried psilocybe cubensis mushrooms, and there's a very strong chance you will see aliens. And why don't you guys ever take me up on that?
His big thing was always, the thing that UFO people don't have that us drug people do is repeatability, and the science won't give us the time of day, but we'll listen to you. So if you can take 10 minutes to call me on whether or not I'm telling the truth about this stuff, why don't you do it?
Yeah, you mentioned YouTube, and there's definitely a treasure trove of videos with him speaking. There's also the highly recommendable Psychedelic Salon podcast with Lorenzo. I urge you to subscribe to that on YouTube right now. And there is this presentation he gave on this conference in San Francisco called Angels, Aliens, and Archetypes. It was in 1987. Mm-hmm. I think Jacques Vallée was there, and also Whitley Strieber, because he mentioned both of them. And it's great because, he's both kind of like scolding ufologists for retaining this simplistic and really kind of like blasé 1950s idea of alien intelligence as extraterrestrials coming in metal spacecraft, and saying, "Take me to your leader." And there is this quote that I actually used for my essay that printed in UFO Reframing the Debate, in which he's saying, rationalism, scientific technology, which began and came out of the scholasticism of the Middle Ages and the quite legitimate wish to glorify God through appreciation of his natural world, turned into a kind of demonic pact, a kind of descent into the underworld, the Nicaea, if you will, leading to the present cultural and political impasse that involves massive stockpiles of atomic weapons, huge propagandized populations cut off of any knowledge of the real histories, male-dominated organizations plying their message of lethal destruction and inevitable historical advance. And into this situation comes suddenly an anomaly, something which cannot be explained. I believe that is the purpose to the UFO, to inject uncertainty into the male-dominated, paternalistic, rational, solar myth under which we are suffering. And then he goes and says, the UFO is nothing more than an assertion of herself by the goddess into history, saying to science and paternalistically governed and driven organizations, you have gone far enough. We are going to turn the world upside down. Your science is going to be shown up for what it is, nothing more than a pleasant metaphor, usefully extrapolated into the production of toys for wealthy children.
That's going to make some people really happy in the comments.
Well, good. Yeah, good. I mean, he loved to tweak. That's what he liked to do, and that's that's why I think so many people found him so refreshing, is that he just kind of, he didn't hold back on criticism of patriarchy and the military, and just he let it fly, and he did it with such eloquence that a lot of people just kind of sat there with their jaws dropped.
Yeah, he was tricksterish. He was kind of like not only a bard, but also a court jester, who is and go and gleefully saying that the emperor has no clothes, and neither is no one in the court,
Yeah. There's one other thing I don't want to forget, and that is the other book that not a whole lot of people know about, that is called, that he and his brother wrote under pseudonyms of O.T. Oss and O. Narek, is the Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide. They sort of serendipitously, they spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to grow magic mushrooms. And there was just that no one knew how to do it properly. Even the CIA and government organizations were having a hard time cultivating these particular mushrooms, the psilocybes, and you can read about it in the Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, but it was kind of a really cool serendipitous way they discovered how to grow the mushrooms, and then they wrote a book, the Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide, and that book, but before that came out, people didn't really take magic mushrooms. If you got so-called magic mushrooms before that book came out, a lot of times it was just regular mushrooms spiked with LSD or something, because no one could actually, unless you went out in the field or found them and picked them or something like that, no one knew how to cultivate magic mushrooms, and that book became an instant underground hit. And as a result of that, people got to experience psychedelic mushrooms, in a way that they never could before. So not only, so Terence was sort of the Pied Piper of the magic mushroom, but he also was responsible for developing not developing, but popularizing the technology that allowed people to actually grow them and allowed so many people to experience them.
We will be remiss if we also didn't mention how Terence pretty much coined the term or the idea of the stoned ape theory.
Yes.
He was really, really an advocate of the idea how psychedelics played a pivotal part in the evolution of the Homo sapiens, and this is something that I think that Graham Hancock has kind of like picked up the torch and pointed out how in 90% of the history of our species, you see pretty much the same boring tools, not really a lot of development. But then something happened, I don't know, I guess in the last 50 or 60,000 years, there was this spike in creativity, and then, our ancestors were doodling all these crazy ass paintings on caves. You see all these what's the word? I don't remember the exact word, but this like shapes that are both animals and also human shapes.
Oh, anthropomorphic.
Oh, Therianthropes.
No, there's there we go.
Yes.
So this is the idea, that the anthropologists presume that these are representations of shamans, and people seeing, a shaman morphing into an elk or a wolf, would probably be the result of psychedelics. So there is this idea, even the famous comedian Bill Hicks, there's this hilarious bit that he had, and there's also the video on YouTube how he, thinks that our ancestors were stupid apes, who couldn't, hunt anything. So the only food they could get were the ones that was laid out on cow pads, and they will go and eat the mushrooms, and after, laughing and say, they will go and say, man, I think we can fly to the moon, man. So basically, Terence was not only saying that the mushroom was the equivalent to 2001's Monolith, Stanley Kubrick's Monolith, but he was also proposing the idea that mushrooms were actual extraterrestrial envoys or emissaries that could travel in the form of spores through the vacuum of space for thousands or millions of years, and they will arrive to a given planet, take root there, and then try to go and have some kind of melding or communication with their indigenous species. He was kind of like posing that as probably a thought experiment of telling the people in the UFO, well, you're thinking about aliens as coming here in metal spaceships like in Star Wars. What I'm proposing here is a technology so advanced and so, far away from what you're thinking, is that it's a colonization of spores that is like sending its tendrils toward the universe and changing the physiology and the mentality of every species that it encounters.
Yeah, his big thing was, if you were to look for some sort of extraterrestrial life on this planet that doesn't have anything associated with it, you look for something that would be unique. And the psilocybin mushrooms, not only are they non-destructive and actually helpful to the ecology of the planet in terms of breaking things down, but they're the only 4-phosphorylated indole on Earth. So for him, that was sort of a marker that perhaps there was something a little bit stranger about it. And he always found it a great irony. One of the things that he talked about was the SETI array down at Arecibo, saying that it's ironic that there are probably cows taking a dump underneath growing psilocybin mushrooms that can get you closer to alien contact than anything else.
Yeah, and in Carl Sagan's Contact, psychedelic mushrooms are mentioned in the film. I know, at least I can't remember if I'm making that up about the book, because it's been so long since I read it. But in the film, apparently there's a little shot of mushrooms growing beneath the, tying directly into what McKenna was saying. So
I did not know that. That's a great little. That's a great little piece of trivia. Yep. The stoned ape thing. The way that I always remember, thinking about it was that I bought A to B and I bought B to C and I bought C to D, but I never quite bought that A to D chain that he proposed. I think it's a really good idea. This idea that apes might be following cows and they might be consuming mushrooms and getting a little bit of a bump in visual acuity from small amounts of psilocybin mushrooms. That sort of started cattle cults, and that started glossolalia around the campfire. The idea that you're just making noises and just nonsense words, and that sort of led to language. I buy each one of those things from like A to B and B to C and C to D, but I have some trouble agreeing with A to D. I don't think that the guy was necessarily flawless, but the way that he makes you think is definitely worth it.
And the just 2 quick points. People always associate cows with psilocybin mushrooms, but they're everywhere. They're on every continent except Antarctica. There are varieties of psilocybins. We're finding there's a famous mushroom scientist, Guzman, and he did a study, mapping where they're found, and they're everywhere. So.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. They some places obviously they're not as abundant as in others, but they exist all over the planet. So they're not just tied to cows. Yeah. But the other part of the stoned ape theory that I find really compelling is that low doses of psilocybin-containing mushrooms actually promote visual acuity. So they sort of sharpen your vision when you take them at low doses. And we know now there's a whole thing of people microdosing on psychedelics for certain sorts of benefits and things like that. But but they provide evolutionary advantage, and that's something that he first kind of put out there as well. And there is data showing that low doses of these mushrooms actually, so they would actually be evolutionarily beneficial to people taking them.
Right. So it's almost like higher functioning in language was a byproduct of just trying to get, an edge at hunting.
Yeah, or maybe just finding. I mean, imagine you are, sort of your typical cave dwelling proto-human or something, and you find a bunch of these interesting, weird, funny looking things growing out of the ground, and you eat them, and you experience ecstasy for the first time. You experience something that is completely alien to your consciousness. What are you going to do? You're going to say, if you don't fall off a cliff in the meantime, or get eaten by the mammoth, or the saber-toothed tiger that's hiding around the corner, you would share that. And as people who've taken psychedelics know, when you're group psychedelic experiences are really very different from solo psychedelic experience. They open up all sorts of avenues of communication, of possible telepathy and things of that nature. So I find it compelling. I wouldn't say that psychedelics led to the emergence of language in humans or anything like that. But damn, if these early humans found these substances, I would think they would be dramatically changed in their ways of thinking and their ways of communicating. Like you brought up, Josh, the glossolalia thing that McKenna, he would demonstrate that sometimes. He'd go, "Ing moing skang once, blah," and he's like, and he would go on this like, his high pitched glossolalia thing, and he's like, do that when you're on a high dose of a psychedelic, and you think of like the Icaros, the songs of ayahuasca shamans and things like that, like language. That's another thing he brought to the table. I mean, to throw something yet else in there, is the idea that reality is largely created and manipulated by language. And when you're in a found psychedelic state, you can experience that. You can create things with language. And in the DMT, the deep DMT experience, that is what these, the elves, the machine elves he talked about, taught him. They would create something out of language. They would create objects out of language. Yeah, and that was another group. That's another thing that when I first started reading them, it really, really blew my mind. And, there's all sorts of ideas, about language and how language shapes our reality and things like that. But he just took it and ran with it in some very, very interesting direction.
Yeah, there's this idea that so people in the UFO business know that there's Neil deGrasse Tyson saying, when has a UFO witness come with some tangible proof that they were on board a flying saucer? When have they retrieved the alien equivalent of a clock? And maybe he doesn't know that there's actually stories of witnesses, people who have tried to steal such objects from on board alien craft. Antonio Villas-Boas, after he had these wild sex with this weird ass blonde female that grunted like a dog when they were into the carnal knowledge. He was given a tour of the ship, and there was this kind of clock, and he wanted to try to steal it, but he was caught in the act, and he was very unceremoniously kicked out of the ship. And there was also the story of Betty Hill. At first, she was promised that by the leader of the aliens that she would be allowed to keep a book, that given to her, but then the book was taken from their hands. So then you read McKenna's accounts, and you come to the realization that when you go into liminal spaces, the only thing that you can retrieve are ideas.
Yes.
No, things made out of language, like he said. You cannot never retrieve, something physical made out of atoms. You can only retrieve things made out of thoughts. But those ideas can, when they take root here in our space, in our world, they can change it. They can take root, and there's this weird alchemy that happens. There's this transmutation when an idea that is retrieved from elsewhere, you can manifest it here, and that I believe that is the reason to me that's what art is. To me, art is manifesting ideas that come from another world, and materialize it into this one. And I think that there's something that he was kind of like putting out there in his talks. This concept of the only thing that you can retrieve if you are ready for it, because most of the time, and this is probably the reason why he became so famous, because he was so articulate. Because people, when they go and they take these heroic doses of psychedelics, when they come back out of it and you ask him, okay, so what did you see? And it was, oh my God, dude, there was this like thing. Yeah. And it was like, whoa. Then I was like, oh, what? And it was like, they cannot express it clearly. He was, more able than most to try to put what he experienced in those travels and put it into words and transmit it to people who remained here in this shore. And I think that kind of impeccability is necessary, in order to try to have a successful, transference or communion, if you will, with whatever entities might be there on the other side of the psychedelic experience.
Yeah, he made the ineffable effable. That's exactly the case. Everyone knows the stereotype of the stoned acid freak, like just like you portrayed. But he showed that you could articulate that experience, and you could interrogate that experience and share it in a way that was not false, it was not silly, but hit on some of the deepest questions that humans have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it might have been Dennis that mentioned this, but the link between coming out of a DMT experience and not being able to articulate everything that happened if you don't do it immediately very much lines up with the propensity to have a dream, and unless you write it down immediately, you'll lose a lot of the same details. And this is something that I actually just mentioned this a while back, because part of what sort of got me on this idea was there was somebody who recently heard a lecture by someone talking about DMT and was like, wow, it kind of almost makes me want to try DMT. And I'm thinking, wow, if you thought that was a good sell, you should listen to Terence McKenna. I mean, I think that if you are sort of a Fortean, or especially somebody who's interested in the UFO topic, it is imperative, and you are remiss if you're not sort of availing yourself of what's out there. Yeah, I think he probably did more to popularize the use of DMT. You mentioned sort of his role in psilocybin, but I mean, DMT this was sort of it was sort of his axe to grind, right? I mean, that's the reason that it sort of took off like it did, I think. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it was very, I mean, it's still a niche substance, but he popularized it, absolutely. And we would not be talking about it, I'm sure, if it hadn't been for Terence. He brought that substance to, well, I guess ayahuasca, which is a DMT containing, admixture of plants, Ayahuasca was sort of, I guess maybe on its way into popular culture, but to smoke DMT, like Terence sort of talked about, was just not part of even the the psychedelic culture in general. It was just a really rare, unusual thing. But it's the holy grail now. I mean, if you're a psychedelic head, that's what you talk about. There have been lots of waves of different chemicals and research chemicals and things like that, but DMT holds that special spot because it is so profoundly unusual, so profoundly different. And having experienced it myself, it's, as Terence says, the only danger, or I'm probably paraphrasing him, is that you could possibly die of astonishment. It is just so strange and so instantly. It is science fiction. I mean, it is going from 1 second in the mundane world to being completely somewhere else, and somewhere else where there's other beings that feel as real as you guys I'm talking to, or real as someone sitting across from me. So the whole, if you're fascinated by any sort of contact with entities, whether it's through magic or UFOs or cryptids or whatever, it is the hands down the most effective, immediate way to turn your mind around and say, oh, okay, well, maybe there is something somewhere, and it's just that close and just that far away at the same time.
Well, and that's the thing. It's for somebody like, so quick preface, for somebody like me who's as interested into what Terence McKenna does, I have not taken any psychedelics for a variety of reasons. I have some health considerations that kind of make me a little bit hesitant. But it's interesting, like, how people will go to that knee-jerk reaction of like, well, drugs are, no drugs in ufology, no drugs in, the experience. Drugs are, drugs are bad, okay? But it's as Dennis McKenna said, as Terrence's brother said, we are drugs. And the funny thing about DMT is that, like, of all the drugs that exist for some sort of form of intoxication, it really is the DMT, which is endogenously produced, psilocybin, which is produced very easily, and cannabinoids. These are the things that your body knows how to handle. Your body doesn't know what to do with ethanol. I mean, that's actually a really nasty customer. So anybody who sort of is hesitant about about the presence of DMT in sort of fitting that into some sort of ontological definition of reality needs to be aware of the fact that, like, you're carrying right now. That was something that Terence was very fond of saying, is like, everyone in this room could be arrested for carrying DMT right now.
Right, Schedule 1 substance in your body.
Schedule 1, imagine that.
Yep.
Also,
I just read this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just read this news story this week that there was this German company that managed to crack the mystery behind psilocybin. So now psilocybin could be potentially mass-produced by a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, it's for the Hopkins experiments that I've written about fairly extensively. It's synthetically produced by a chemist named Dave Nichols, who's sort of the go-to chemist for psychedelics. When the government says it's okay to do some research, they call Dave and say, okay, Dave. It's not that difficult to make. Of course, it's very easy to make as a mushroom, provided you have the spores. But yeah, you're right. I mean, these chemicals, they fit, especially the cannabinoids. We have receptors in our brains for them. We have endogenous DMT, although for a long time people have sort of, and Rick Strassman as well, who's the only person who have done experiments with people with DMT. for a long time he believed that maybe DMT could be related to near-death experiences or dreams, things like that. Recently, Dave Nichols, the chemist I just talked about, he did a presentation at a psychedelic conference called the Breaking Conference, I believe it's called, and where he sort of shot down that endogenous DMT. So first of all, there's so little in our bodies that it's very unlikely that it's having any kind of psychoactive effect. He also sort of did a good job kind of putting a stake in the idea. Well, maybe not driving a stake through it, but there's been this idea tossed around for a long time that the pineal gland, produces DMT. That's just kind of myth. No one knows. It's exciting to think that it does, because that's the third eye. It's always associated with the third eye and things like that. But and in regard to DMT being related to near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences and dreams and things like that, it's never quite made sense to me, because DMT, when you experience DMT, it's such a freaking weird, bizarre experience. Visually, there's absolutely nothing that compares to it. McKenna talked about dying of astonishment, and it's absolutely true. There's nothing like it in any other psychedelics. It has nothing at all in common with the phenomenology of a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience. It's just plain weird and alien.
There is a lucidity to it, though, that sort of maps on the near-death experience, right?
Yeah, there's absolute lucidity. You know, when you're in that DMT dome, like I was, and it's a breathing organic membrane in hues of red and purplish, things like that. But you also know that you're sitting comfortably, breathing in the chair. Where you just had this inhalation of this stuff. So, yeah, there is a lucidity to it, but it doesn't at all match the phenomenology of a near-death experience. Although something like ketamine is much more, ketamine's much more like you hear a near-death experience described. Well, and John Lilly goes very much into the ketamine experience, but the whole idea of endogenous DMT producing, it just has never made sense to me. And there's actually no physiological explanation for how it would do that, and there's just not enough of it in the humans to create a profound sense of and I could be wrong.
Have you tried ayahuasca?
I have not.
Because I haven't either, but there's the idea that the pure DMT experience is so immediate and so dramatic in such a small amount of time, whereas with the ayahuasca, because of how the brew is concocted, it kind of like lets the chemical be, ingested or be processed by your system in such a gradual form that maybe that is how it turns into I don't want to say more profound, but maybe less alien of a trip.
Yeah, it's longer lasting for sure. So a lot of people believe you can get more insight into the experience because it lasts longer. And the interesting thing about ayahuasca is that somehow the peoples of Central and South America figured out that if you take a monoamine oxidase inhibitor and mix it up with some DMT containing yahe vine, that's what they were doing, like this incredible chemistry with these plants. They figured, of course they will tell you that the plants told them. This is what you do. So yeah, I still, but there's no correlate to having that MAO inhibitor in our body transforming the DMT. So maybe it will come out that yes, DMT is a factor in mystical experiences, but the more data that's emerging, it seems like that's not really what's happening.
Yeah, it seems like, from what I recall, the last bit of research that I heard, and I might have not heard what you said earlier, Mike, but was suggesting that DMT had more to do with edge detection. In other words, sort of catching a glimpse of something. That's sort of the role that it plays in the body, is when you catch something out of the corner of your eye. Something also, you mentioned ketamine. I think it was interesting how Terence once suggested that certain substances have to be populated by users, or by like the psychological weight or baggage of certain users. And he mentioned that, like, when he first tried ketamine, it was sort of early on that sort of it was early on the ketamine early into its usage, recreationally. And he said it was almost felt like an empty office building when he went to that space.
Yeah.
Sort of felt like everybody had just left for the weekend or something.
Maybe they did.
The thing about ketamine as well is, as far as I know, ketamine is not produced naturally by the body.
No.
So when they were trying to use that to explain near-death experiences, it doesn't really work, because it would require the body to suddenly be able to produce ketamine.
Right.
Did they try to get ketamine to have they suggested that ketamine is a near-death experience?
It's been suggested, not actual ketamine, but that maybe there's a ketamine-like chemical, an endogenous. Because as far as the phenomenology of an NDE, it is more similar. So people have speculated that perhaps there's a ketamine-like chemical, in our bodies, but so far I don't think anyone has actually detected it.
Explain one unknown with another one unknown. Good job, guys.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I also believe that when I had Strassman on, I think he said that the current belief is that DMT is actually created in the lungs, not the pineal gland.
Didn't hear that.
Which is nice, because spiritus, is deals with inspiration. The anima, is something that you inhale and exhale.
Well, and two other things. Holotropic breathing. And also this idea that, like, the Word of God created the universe. Something about breath, that sort of Yahweh, Yah, sort of, Om sort of thing, being a way to gain, connection with the universe. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and prana, the yogic idea of prana. Yep.
Yeah, and anyone who's done breathing work of any kind can tell you what a phenomenal effect it can have on you.
Oh, yeah.
All right, back to McKenna.
So, maybe we should talk about the infamous time waves.
Yeah. One of his less proud moments, I think, overall.
Probably, but at the same time, it was. I guess it carried its mission, because I get it. It was his attempt to try to combine a whole lot of different things, the I Ching, and I think there was this scatological ideas from Christianity, and I'm thinking about, Taylor de Chardin and the Omega. The Omega point, and combine that with ideas about, I don't know, cybernetics and what was happening with technology in our modern time, and try to scramble that up into a psychedelic cocktail, and to tell people that there was going to be this momentous experience that was going to happen to all of humanity. And the problem probably with all prophecies is when you give a certain date.
Right.
You say that, in January 19 of 1956, the world is going to come to an end, or Jesus is going to come back. And if that doesn't happen, so you double down, or you go and, hide into a rock. And I think that's what happened to McKenna. He was, I don't know, I guess he came up with these ideas, which, by the way, were given to him initially during his mushroom experiences at La Chorrera.
Mm-hmm.
Then he kind of like perfected that idea. I think that he kind of like wrote some kind of like computer program or something.
Yeah, he did. It was sort of like an old like IBM clunky desktop program of
He wasn't a computer scientist, so take that into account. Even though he was a polymath, but he came up with this concept that was kind of like similar, or kind of like coinciding with the end of the Mayan Baktun in 2012. So I guess he had his aha moment and said, okay, so that's
but that was later.
Well, no, he came up when he came up with the idea, basically of folding the visions that he had, the information he was given, into taking the I Ching and rolling it into the pattern of history, etc. And he programmed this stuff out, and he realized that it was 2012. That 2012 was the end point. What he called the imminentation, he frequently called it was possibly the imminentation of the eschaton. It's like the fancy way of saying the end of the world. I guess it sounds so much better when you say it that way. But he very much Jose Arguelles, and there were others who jumped on the 2012 bandwagon. But I really think it was Terence that I could be wrong, that got that rolling. And I remember in the years leading up to that, I knew people that there was an online, primitive sort of online graph, time wave zero novelty graph. And the whole idea was that there were points in the calendar that coincided with the cycles of the I Ching projected onto time, that had that end point of 2012. And there were times when novelty would increase. And those were, so people would try to plot, oh, well, it's this day, and, it's 1998, September 18th, what's happening here? Because the novelty is, here's a big spike in the graph where novelty should be spiking. So it was really fascinating watching as it moved towards 2012, and people were plotting different things, and you could go, if you had online access at that point, which a lot of people didn't, but I remember, I could go on, like, pop a date into that program, and it would spit out, what the level of novelty was, and show you the little graph and things like that. So I think he was without him, the whole 2012 thing probably would not have been as powerful with it culturally as it turned out to be.
Now, to be fair to Terence and his sort of failed prediction, he was definitely tapping. I mean, I think there's no denying that as much as he talked about Yeats, that he was sort of inspired by the idea of, Yeats's gyres of history that sort of do these things. And I think that he was tapping into a very real idea that there is a cyclicality to sort of just the Western civilizational experience, or even a global civilizational experience. I just think that he got the date wrong.
I mean,
hang on. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but initially he had predicted it was going to be 2016, and he reconsidered it after reading up more on the whole 2012 date and felt that fit better.
That's possible.
That's possible. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sketchy.
It's
would been a while.
Sitting here in 2017, that sounds like it's a more accurate prediction.
Yeah, well, that's it. And that's what I found so interesting.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure that was his initial time wave zero thing. The point of ultimate novelty would have been in 2016. And we definitely have a pretty novel 2016 happening, and then
I mean, those
right.
ideas are interesting.
This is when
and
the
not
simulation gets rebooted, right? Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
I mean, the concept that he kind of like proposed, the idea that consciousness, the role of consciousness in the universe is to inject novelty as a way to try to counter entropy, right? From a point of view of conservation of energy and such, and thinking of the new physics, the physics of information that people like Jacques Vallée are proposing, that is going to like supplant, replace, or improve our current model of physics. And also from a philosophical point of view, the idea that novelty alters our perception of time. Like, if there's nothing happening, nothing really important or distinctive happening, it's you see a perception of time that is very slow. But nowadays, in our 21st century, you open up your tablet, your smartphone, in the morning, and you start to check out emails and Twitter and whatever, and you see 10, 12 things, 12 stories of novel discoveries or inventions that have been happening that were just impossible to conceive, not only like 200 years ago, but maybe 2 years ago. And it really seems that that level of novelty is increasing.
Yeah.
To the point that there's people like Ray Kurzweil, who I don't know if he ever met Terence McKenna, but he proposes the idea of the singularity, right? And then the singularity in itself is not that dissimilar from this object at the end of time that Terence McKenna was proposing. It's basically proposing this kind of like asymptotic event, that instead of the progression that we have perceived, that is kind of like steady and kind of like upward, no, it will be, the singularity is kind of like a straight line into infinity, right? And that was like what Terence was proposing. Was kind of like proposing this I don't know, the second coming of Christ. And that's actually something that Dennis, his own brother, criticized about Terence's ideas. He said, as someone who was, since renouncing his Catholic past, he was still very much rooted in these the same eschatological ideas that have plagued the mindset of Christian mystics for the last 2,000 years.
Yeah, I just looked through my notes, and which I'm surprised I actually found it, but Terence is quoted as saying that he came to that date, December 21st, 2012, and only afterward found out that it was supposedly the Mayan, the end of the Baktun, the end of the calendar. So, yeah. So that I guess that was pretty astounding to him, and I think if I had cooked up some concept of time and novelty, and it happened to coincide with the end of the Mayan Mayan cycle, I'd probably be pretty freaked out.
Well, yeah. I mean, and that was meant to be a cycle. I mean, it's
right.
not,
Yeah,
it wasn't the end of the world thing that everyone was, all the, what do you want to call it? The sensationalism was based around.
Well, the thing with Mayan mythologies is every time that a world ends, a new begins, and you could argue if you want that 2012 saw the end of a world, and if you
Right.
see how different the world is now in 2017 from the world in 2012,
Yeah,
you
you're
know.
not kidding.
Mhm.
And talking about the time, I mean, I don't want to inject politics, but I'll just say a lot of people that comment about certain current political trends, they say, wow, like a week or a week feels like 6 months, because there's so much change and so much like chaos and things that are happening politically and socially that it really does feel like time has been deeply altered. In the way that I guess time flies when you're having fun. Well, I guess time flies when when chaos has overtaken your consciousness as well.
Yeah. When you're miserable. Yeah.
Could I throw in one of my
Usually
favorite McKenna quotes?
Please do.
He's so quotable, it's ridiculous. But I think this is a great one for the things that we talk about. So, and I use this in a UFO talk that I used to do about sort of the occult aspects of UFOs. This is such a great quote. We are part of a symbiotic. We are part of a symbiotic. I would have to have Josh do it.
We are part of a We're part of a symbiotic relationship. Yeah.
With something which disguises itself as an extraterrestrial invasion so as not to alarm us. I love that. I mean, I think that hits on something really deep, and it hits on, that experience he had when he saw the UFO that looked like a George Adamski thing, ripped off a piece of machinery and thrown up in the air so someone could take a picture of it. And the tricksterish aspect of the UFO phenomenon, and that it is deceptive and it's disguising itself. And what would it disguise itself as? As an extraterrestrial invasion, so as not to alarm us, because we would be way more alarmed if we learned that the human oversoul manifests as a technological device. There's aliens and spaceships flying up there.
Well, I remember in one of his topics, one of his conversations about UFOs, he said that, he thought that the idea of an alien fleet appearing at Earth would be, about as subtle as using a SWAT team to, a Panzer tank to break down the front door to say, hey, I'm here. So, yeah, he definitely was an advocate of I think he ascribed more subtlety to the phenomena than a lot of us do.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
And the fact that it is like a Valet control system, like the quote that you read earlier, Red Pill, that we've reached a point in our history where what he called the oversoul of humanity, or I guess what Jung would call the collective unconscious, has to do something to shock us or to bring us out of this perilous situation that we're in. And the only way to do that is to do something so freaking weird as to make lights in the sky, or for weird things to appear in people's bedrooms, or whatever it takes, and to shift us away from, I guess, our philiac society. And again, if Terence were saying this, it would be really eloquent and funny. And I'm just kind of stumbling for words, but I think you guys get what I'm talking about.
And it's kind of a paradox. We're talking about the technophiliac society, but at the same time, it is because we are living in a technophiliac society that people nowadays are probably more in knowledge of Terence McKenna than when he was alive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
We discussed how he and his brother wrote this book about teaching people how to grow mushrooms, and we cannot forget that the Silicon Valley culture is about people who like to experiment, they like to tinker with things, including their own minds. So, I mean, there's a part of me who thinks that this thing that we are using now, the internet, that is becoming the global brain of our civilization, was built on the foundations of the things that people like McKenna were advocating first in an analogical way. And now it's free to proliferate and leave its digital spores everywhere. You know, it's a delicious paradox. It's a contradiction, but I think that he of all people will be able to enjoy it.
Well, as long as we're doing our favorite quotes from Saint Terence, does anybody mind if I do one of mine?
Oh,
Sure.
please, but you have to do it in the voice.
I have to do it in the voice. Okay, it's a little bit long. We all, I suppose, here give great credence to what is called quantum physics. Is there anyone here who would care to explain to the group several of the core doctrines of quantum physics? Yeah, this is our truth. How crazy are you if your truth is something you can't even understand? We believe that somewhere among us, somebody understands these tensor equations of the third degree, and that if it got real tight, we could go to them and they would explain what reality is. This is a head full of. Oh, are we gonna broadcast this, Seriah? Because I can't say this word. This is a head full of.
It's
of.
You can swear.
This
it's
is
fine.
a head full of shit. This kind of thinking. What are you actually dealing with is what Wittgenstein called the present at hand. It implies that only that which can be grasped matters. And the quark cannot be grasped, the meson, the electromagnetic field, none of it. These things need to be understood for what they are, which is, and this is my favorite part, little shingles which we epoxy onto the face of the universal mystery. And once you have a bunch of these little shingles epoxied onto the face of the mystery, then you can't see the mystery at all anymore, and you call that an explanation. And that's just one that I keep on coming back to because it's really what, like, he says he was anti-science. He wasn't anti-science. He was he was anti-scientism. He was really just calling into question, you know, the basic fundamental philosophical tenets of science. I think that, like, his thoughts would be great fodder for, like, a philosophy of science textbook or, course or something. I mean, one of the things that he said to me one of the things that I remembered hearing is he was talking about Rupert Sheldrake's work, the morphogenic field of certain, once one thing happens once among a population, it becomes easier for that thing to happen just by having it happen. And he said, that, science is the only thing that hopes to measure things that are crude enough that they will not, let me get this straight. Science makes the assumption that you can have a restoration of initial conditions. And therefore, it assumes that the only things that can be measured are crude enough that the restoration of initial conditions can be assumed. But this doesn't explain things, he said, like, love affairs, business deals, war campaigns, any of these sort of things. And that's just one of those nice things to wrap your head around that goes, that's really interesting that, there is that sort of tacit assumption that there is this, restoration of initial conditions to science. So that's the sort of thing that, like, if you dig into his lectures, you do get that sort of that thematic underpinning of really questioning not necessarily science, but like the philosophy on which a lot of these assumptions are based.
But he was also I posted something for the group of us talking today. He was also very much a rationalist as well. The quote I love, I have here, since we're in St. Terence quote part of the program. He says, "My method, my style." I can't do it I can never do it as well as Josh, so I have to read it in my own voice. "My method, my style has always been to be open-minded, to be critical, to be rational, but to seek the weird, and to seek it seriously. Now, if you seek the weird without a critical intelligence, it will find you faster than you can lock your apartment behind you. The number of squirrely ideas on the market these days is truly alarming. And remember, this is probably 20 years ago. He wrote this.
Could have been written yesterday.
He says, I coined a phrase, I hope, the balkanization of epistemology. This is what we're dealing with now. You understand what I mean? It means people can't tell shit from shinola, but they want to talk about it a lot. This is a place where you have to bring to bear what are called razors, logical razors. One is, hypotheses should not be multiplied without necessity. Another is, equations should not be multiplied without necessity. Razors always seek what is called the principle of parsimony. In other words, keep it simple, stupid. The simplest explanation is always to be preferred first. And he was talking about that with a group of people in one of his lectures or wide-ranging talks that he did. And he was talking about how there's a relativity in certain communities. And I would say that, and he talks about the UFO community. He says, and we've got people talking about channeling messages from Zeta Reticulans in one room, and we've got someone in the other room talking about analyzing, a piece of organic material they found at a alleged landing site. But everybody gets along, and he had this. He sort of was saying, we really need to take control of our communities, and we have to not be afraid to say, well, that sounds like okay, but what's your proof of that? What's your data? So as crazy and off the wall into the psychedelic inner experience that he talked about, he was also very he said you have to learn to be street smart when you're in these fields, these fields that are considered fringe by mainstream, conventional science. It's great to seek the weird, but you've got to develop a BS meter, and you've got to apply basic rationality and look for the parsimonious explanation of something and not multiply theories, out the wazoo. And we see that all the time nowadays. And I feel like that's crippling our community. I mean, look at what MUFON has become. It's the breakaway civilization conference. It's stuff that's just completely unverifiable, not based in anything at all factual for the most part, and yet it's just that's where things seem to be going. And in the conspiracy community, which I talk a lot about, same thing. I mean, it's the wheels have gone off, the train's off the tracks, it's over the cliff, it's plunging into the freaking volcano below, and it's really destroying a lot of what was built up by serious researchers and smart people. And I think Terence had a really good take on that. He's like, you don't have to worry about being polite when it comes to crap. I mean, you have to be able to say, well, that's interesting that you believe that, but it sounds like crap to me. And unless you have a better, more logical way of explaining it, I'll be happy to consider that you believe that, but you're not going to sit here and tell me it's the truth, or you're not going to get me on board with that too.
Well, it sort of reminds me of, this coming back to Yeats, written, around the time of the First World War, turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. That's sort of exactly what we're going through now.
Things fall apart, the center cannot hold.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's what we're seeing. It's like reality just seems to be deeply broken. If not in a sense that the simulation has been infected by malevolent elvish malware that people have their critical thinking and their discernment has just sort of just been blown to pieces.
and maybe something good can come out of it. I mean, there was this conference in which Timothy Leary introduced Terence McKenna. I don't know if that was the only time in which both shared the stage. And I think there cannot be, no one can deny that Terence kind of like became the inheritor to Timothy Leary's legacy. You know, he kind of like picked up the torch of the psychedelic movement when people like Timothy Leary, you know, had to flee the scene because they were, you know, actively persecuted by the authorities. And in that particular presentation, it was interesting because Terence was talking about psychedelics in a very alchemical way. And he was talking about the current state of disarray and chaos, equating it to that stage in the alchemical work that is called the nigredo. And I actually found a transcript of that presentation. Maybe I can read some of that. It's saying here, so what do we do with that? The answer is we welcome it. This is what the alchemist awaited, the nigredo, the prima materia, the dark matter and the chaos that is the precondition then for redemption. And God knows we got a lot of chaos right now. We have war, famine and revolution, millions of homeless people on the move, the nation state is dissolving, the relief agencies of the world can't keep up, the various secret societies, mafias, and cabals that have always tried to tie us into chains, they are all working overtime. We are in the nigredo condition. Hallelujah! This means that the kissing has to stop, but the fun can begin. The real fun. The other end of this bipolar condition in alchemy was called the albedo. The albedo, the whitening, and that means out of the chaos can come a new beginning, a new reality, and a new hope. These alchemists existed in a philosophically more naive, quote, more naive world than we do. So they actually projected onto the processes of matter their own interior psychic condition. They did work with matter, fire, furnaces, and retorts, and what they will do is they will take the prima materia, lead or excrement or something else, and then they will heat it. They will turn it to ash and then calcinate the ash or pour solvents through the ash and get an extract, and then heat that and sublimate it. Out of this, almost as a footnote, came modern chemistry. But that was not the important side of it. The important side of it was that they were projecting mental states onto the swirling retorts of their laboratory. It was like a magical mirror for them. It was, in fact, there we say the key word. It was psychedelic. What psychedelic means is getting your mind out in front of you by whatever means necessary so that you can relate to it as a thing in the world and then work upon it.
Excellent. And he probably just said that. I mean, that wasn't prepared. You know, that's the kind of thing that came out of the guy, you know?
Okay. I don't know which direction to take this because, like I said, I'm not overly familiar with this stuff. What else haven't we explored about him?
Oof.
He was a butterfly collector.
True.
Yeah, he was a well-known butterfly collector all through his life. His death was kind of sad too. I mean, he wasn't that old, and he got a very malignant form of brain cancer, which Dennis talks about that part of his life. Again, I can't recommend the Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss book written by Dennis about Dennis and Terence and their life together. But it was It was a real shock to a lot of us in the psychedelic community. I knew a lot of people that knew Terence personally, and when everybody heard that he was sick, and then we knew the extent of it. He was very open too. I mean, he talked about his cancer and how advanced it was and things like that. Interestingly, people were like, well, try cannabis, because there was that, a growing sort of understanding of the role of cannabinoids as fighting cancer. And, he's like, if cannabis could cure cancer, believe me, like I would never have gotten cancer. But it was really sad. I mean, it really felt like an elder of the community was passing, and he's truly missed. I can't imagine what he would be saying today. Maybe he got out of, maybe he made a smart exit before he would have to watch, how things unfolded. But he his legacy, and what you said, Red Pill, was so perfect, and it's so true, is that so many more people know about him now than did when he was at his prime, because his ideas and his humor and his wit and his incredible way of explaining things just has found such a huge audience. People keep discovering him, and what a tremendous life he led, and left us with so much to talk about and so much to think about.
Am I wrong in that the tumor actually resembled a mushroom?
I've heard that. Yeah, I don't know if any of you guys have confirmed that, but that would not be surprising in a hermetic, as above, so below sort of way.
A few weeks ago, I had used a song from Karen Stever to end the show, and it's about spiders in that case, and she has an affinity for spiders, and she also has a brain tumor, and it resembles a spider.
Yeah. Well, Terrence's brain tumor was about the size of a walnut, and it did resemble, I believe, it was an inverted mushroom. If memory serves me correctly. He was really concerned about his cannabis habit having contributed to the tumor, and the doctors actually told him no. But there was a really poignant quote from him upon just before his death in 2000. He was 53, so he's super young. But a super poignant quote that's always sort of stuck with me. He said, I always thought death would come on the freeway in a few horrifying moments, so you'd have no time to sort it out. Having months and months to look at it and to think about it and to talk with people and hear what they have to say, it's kind of a blessing. It's certainly an opportunity to grow up and get a grip and sort it all out. Just being told by an unsmiling guy in a white coat that you're going to be dead in 4 months definitely turns on the lights. It makes life rich and poignant. Mm-hmm. When it first happened, and I got these diagnoses, I could see the light of eternity, a la William Blake, shining through every leaf. I mean, a bug walking across the ground moved me to tears. Mm-hmm. So it was. I hate that I wasn't. I was pretty darn young at the time, but I hate that I wasn't aware of his work when he was alive, because it's been so prolific and influential. I don't even think he would have grasped in some ways how influential he has been.
Yeah.
Well, at least we have the technology like the internet where people can discover him now, long after.
Yes, and I can't recommend highly enough. There's a couple of guys, feel free to chime in, but archive.org has a lot of his lectures as MP3s. A lot of the stuff that you find on YouTube is chopped up, and it's harder to find just giant actual lectures as they were presented on YouTube, because they're usually mixed and matched.
Go to Psychedelics Alone. Lorenzo has done a great work, preserving and putting those.
Yeah, then do that, yeah.
Those lectures, yeah, in the ones that he did in Palenque.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Palenque lectures are phenomenal. And I had a set of tapes. I had a set of 8 cassette tapes at one point. It was put out by Sounds True, I believe. I know they're still around. So you could probably find these. It was just Terence for 8 hours talking about stuff, and I think you Sounds True is the company's still around, and they publish. It's on DVD or downloads now.
Yeah, and if anybody, I think I've listened to some of those, Mike, and if there's anybody who is sort of into the UFO thing, who's looking to sort of like, I don't know about this guy, look up his interview on Thinking Aloud with Jeffrey Mischke.
Oh yeah,
that's a great interview. I remember one time I challenged a skeptical friend of mine. I'm like, let's do 30 days of pro UFO, basically skeptic to the UFO question, posts on each other's Facebook walls. So the first day he posts something that's like, about, I don't know, it's about something, just a typical skeptical argument about, why would, about, I don't know, the Drake, not even the Drake equation, but just something, just generic. Paradox? Yeah, exactly. And so my second day, the thing I fired back was with that, Terence McKenna Thinking Aloud episode. Like the rest of it was just like nothing. There's no response. I was like, what do you think of this, man? And he's like, nothing. So because it really does turn a lot of things on their head. So I can't recommend that highly enough.
Oh, also it's called the Trialogues. It's a series. It's a series of talks between Rupert Sheldrake, Ralph Abraham, and Terence.
Yeah,
those are amazing. There's a couple of books that came out of it, and there are videos. You can find that stuff links to that on Rupert Sheldrake's website. Those were fantastic, and that's when Terence was really, becoming a luminary. And it's just so cool. I mean, for me, just personally, I was, it was like so many things were sort of coming together in my life at that time. I was in my late 20s, I guess. My interest in psychedelics was something so novel and world-changing for me, experiencing psychedelics and becoming involved in the psychedelic community. But it was the same time the whole abduction thing was taking off, and Whitley's books were becoming really popular. And I was getting into the occult, the practical occult, and things like that. Reading Jacques Vallée, reading Charles Fort, all this stuff. I mean, it was such like a heady time. And the internet, the internet was blowing up, and we still had all these grand ideas that it was going to change the world and connect everyone in this, sort of kumbaya sort of way and solve all of our problems. And there was Terence, tying all those threads together. And, I just remember thinking, we're really coming to a point in our evolution as humans where we're figuring stuff out. And, it was such a euphoric, utopian feeling that all these things were converging, and we were just really starting to understand the human experience in a different way, a much different way than we've been taught. And then watching it all, sort of blow up and become even crazier than we possibly imagined it could be. That was a really magical time, just for me personally. And I just remember I was on an email list, because that pre-Facebook and pre-Twitter and things, that's how you communicated with groups of people, and that's how you, when Leo said, find the others, and that's how you found the others. And I remember I got an email reply from Terence, and that was like, wow. Yeah, I know. And because he would occasionally chime in on this list. It was called like Entheogen explorers or something like that, and it was this email list of maybe 100, 200 people all talking about psychedelics and entheogens, and And I got a reply from a personal email from Terence at one point. I'm just like, wow, that's
Here
it.
was this.
It's over, man. It's not going to become cooler than that. And so it really did feel like we were on the cusp of something, and I guess we kind of were. We just didn't see all of the sides of how all this technology and the psychedelic technology and social patterns and things were all going to turn out to this crazy thing we're living in right now.
I just hope that it was the
All
reply
right.
wasn't, "Hey, Michael, please don't write in all caps."
Even then, I knew not to write it all caps.
Slow your roll, bro.
I wish I could remember what it said. Even I mean, I also when I was on CompuServe, I mean that's dial-up modem. I dial up on my modem and get on CompuServe, and I emailed Whitley Strieber through the CompuServe, and I made this long, enormous email about my UFO sighting in 1990, and I thought, oh, he's not going to reply. And he wrote back and he said, "Sounds like they want you to come out and play." And I, oh my God! Whitley Strieber wrote me, and he wrote me the
Dear
creepiest
Michael.
thing possible. But that's what it was, and here we are.
Yeah. So this is my charge to everyone. Go listen.
Yeah.
Not even in lieu of your favorite podcast, like Where Did the Road Go, but like just take some time, throw on some Terence McKenna, Terence with one R, and just dive in and see what happens. And I if one person gets something out of it, then I mission accomplished for this podcast, I think.
Yeah, at minimum, you will be entertained. He is a deeply, profoundly entertaining speaker. But if you're lucky, you will be not challenged, and maybe if you're really lucky, your mind will be blown by what he's talking about. And then if you really want to, take him up on his challenge, get yourself a few grams of dried psilocybe mushrooms and go into a dark room.
Oh yeah.
Don't do this the first time, and make sure there's somebody in the room next door. So if you start beating on the door, screaming, they can calm you down. But I and Terence would also be the one to say, psychedelics are not for everyone. He said, if someone you would not give a ticket to take a trip to Paris, or someone who's clearly damaged and would have a really hard time with any sort of ego dissolution or things like that. Obviously, no, these substances are not for everyone. But if you are intrigued, if you're one of those people that says, wow, that sounds interesting, and I've always been fascinated by this. Terence also said to go to the grave without having had a psychedelic experience is the equivalent of dying without having had sex. And I think there's a little bit of truth in that. And, as a human, if you want to avail yourself of the experiences that we can have, the fact that there are these plants out there that can do really amazing things, plants, chemicals, don't hold back. Be cautious, learn, understand what you're doing, be with someone who understands how to navigate this territory. But it's an aspect of being human that I think it can be really valuable for some people. Don't do this at home.
All right. Any other final words, guys?
Just sort of echo what Mike said. I remember one point Terence said, if you think that there's no more mystery left in the world, take 5 grams in silent darkness and Magellan will take a back seat on a stormy Sunday evening. So, yeah, I think my real charge was, Terence used to say, go find the others. I say, go find Terence, then go find the others.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
Always
a pleasure.
Always.
Yeah, delightful.